The following readings are taken from The Broken Spears, the Aztec Account of the Conquest of Mexico, edited and with an introduction by Miguel Leon Portilla, with a foreword by Jorge Clor de Elva. Beacon Press in 1992. Read by me, Professor Patrick Fontes. The Broken Spears. The Spaniards march on Tlaxcala and Cholula. Introduction. Despite the efforts of Montezuma's envoys to keep the Spaniards from approaching Tenochtitlan, Cortés decided to march inland. The two indigenous accounts presented in this chapter, the first by Sahagun's informants, the second by the Mestizo Muñoz Camargo, describe the arrival of the Spaniards in Tlaxcala and Cholula. The account by the informants mentions the first battle between Spaniards and Indians, a group of Otomi Indians from Tecoac, after which the Tlaxcalans decided to receive the strangers in peace. As soon as the Spaniards arrived, the Tlaxcalans began to intrigue against nearby Cholula and the Aztecs. There are two separate versions of what led the Spaniards to massacre the Indians in Cholula. According to Sahagun's informants, the massacre was inspired by the intrigues of the Tlaxcalans, whose souls burned with the hatred for the people of Cholula. According to Muñoz Camargo, the Cholulans brought their own destruction on themselves by not surrendering to Cortés, and by treacherously murdering the envoy from Tlaxcala, Patlahuatzin, who advised them to form an alliance with the Spaniards. This second version may have been invented by the Tlaxcalans to excuse their part in the massacre. At least, there is no corroboration for it either in the Historia of Bernal Diaz del Castillo or the Cartas de Relación of Cortés. The Spanish March Inland. This is taken from the Codex Florentino by Sahagun's informants. At last they came. At last they began to march toward us. A man from Sempoala, who was known as Tlacochcalacatil, chief of the House of Arrows, was the first official to welcome them as they entered our lands and cities. This man spoke Nahuatl. He showed them the best routes and the shortest ways. He guided and advised them, traveling at the head of the party. When they came to Tecoac, the land of the Tlaxcalans, they found it was inhabited by the Otomis. The Otomis came out to meet them in battle array. They greeted the strangers with their shields. But the strangers conquered the Otomis of Tecoac. They utterly destroyed them. They divided their ranks, fired the cannons at them, attacked them with their swords, and shot them with their crossbows. Not just a few, but all of them perished in the battle. And when Tecoac had been defeated, the Tlaxcalans soon heard the news. They learned what had taken place there. They felt premonitions of death. Terror overwhelmed them, and they were filled with foreboding. Therefore the chiefs assembled. The captains met together in a council. They talked about what had happened and said, "What shall we do? Shall we go out to meet them? The Otomi is a brave warrior, but he was helpless against them. They scorn him as a mere nothing. They destroyed the poor Macual with a glance of their eyes. We should go over to their side. We should make friends with them and be their allies. If not, they will destroy us too." The arrival at Tlaxcala. Therefore the lords of Tlaxcala went out to meet them, bringing many things to eat, hens and hens' eggs, and the finest tortillas. They said to the strangers, "Our lords, you are weary." The strangers replied, "Where do you live? Where are you from?" They said, "We are from Tlaxcala. You have come here. You have entered our land. We are from Tlaxcala. Our city is a city of the eagle, Tlaxcala." For in ancient times it was called Tlaxcala, and its people were known as the Tlaxcaltecas. Then they guided them to the city. They brought them there and invited them to enter. They paid them great honors, attended to their every want, joined with them as allies, and even gave them their daughters. The Spaniards asked, "Where is the city of Mexico? Is it far from here?" They said, "No, it is not far. It is only a 3-day march, and it is a great city. The Aztecs are very brave. They are great warriors and conquerors, and have defeated their neighbors on every side." Intrigues against Cholula. At this time, the Tlaxcalans were enemies of Cholula. They feared the Cholulans. They envied and cursed them. Their souls burned with hatred for the people of Cholula. This is why they brought certain rumors to Cortez, so that he would destroy them. They said to him, "Cholula is our enemy. It is an evil city. The people are as brave as the Aztecs, and they are the Aztecs' friends." When the Spaniards heard this, they marched against Cholula. They were guided and accompanied by the Tlaxcalans and the chiefs from Sempoala, and they marched in battle array. The massacre at Cholula. When they arrived, the Tlaxcalans and the men of Cholula called to each other and shouted greetings. An assembly was held in the courtyard of the god. But when they had all gathered together, the entrances were closed, so that there was no way of escaping. Then the sudden slaughter began, knife strokes and sword strokes and death. The people of Cholula had not foreseen it, had not suspected it. They faced the Spaniards without weapons, without their swords or their shields. The cause of the slaughter was treachery. They died blindly, without knowing why, because of the lies of the Tlaxcalans. And when this had taken place, word of it was brought to Montezuma. The messengers came and departed, journeying back and forth between Tenochtitlan and Cholula. The common people were terrified by the news. They could do nothing but tremble with fright. It was as if the earth had trembled beneath them, or as if the world were spinning before their eyes, as it spins during a fit of vertigo. When the massacre at Cholula was complete, the strangers set out again toward the city of Mexico. They came in battle array as conquerors, and the dust rose in whirlwinds on the roads. Their spears glinted in the sun, and their pennons fluttered like bats. They made a loud clamor as they marched, for their coats of mail and their weapons clashed and rattled. Some of them were dressed in glistening iron from head to foot. They terrified everyone who saw them. Their dogs came with them, running ahead of the column. They raised their muzzles high. They lifted their muzzles to the wind. They raced on before, with saliva dripping from their jaws. Negotiations before the battle. From the Historia de Tlaxcala by Diego Muñoz Camargo. From this time forward, the Spaniards had no other purpose than to raise soldiers against the Culuas Mexicanos. They did this within a very short time, so as to give them no opportunity to form an alliance with the Tlaxcalans, and to avoid bad thoughts, as well as other new incidents and proposals. Cortez saw to it that his new friends and confederates did not leave his side, using his wits as always as an astute leader to take advantage of a favorable situation. When the ranks were formed, the Spanish troops and the Tlaxcalans marched out in good military order, with enough supplies for their great undertaking, and with many important and famous captains, all skilled in warfare according to their ancient customs and practices. But because there were so many, with such a variety of names, the others are not set down here, only the most outstanding, who were always loyal to Cortez until the end of his conquests. The first invasion took place at Cholula, which was governed and ruled by two lords, Tlaquich and Tlachiac. For the lords who succeeded to that command were always known by those names, which mean Lord of what is above and Lord of what is below. Once they entered the province of Cholula, the Spaniards quickly destroyed that city because of the great provocations given by its inhabitants. So many Cholulans were killed in that invasion that the news raced through the land as far as the city of Mexico. There it caused the most horrible fright and consternation, for it was also known that the Tlaxcalans had allied themselves with the quote and unquote gods, as the Spaniards were called in all parts of the New World, for lack of another name. The Cholulans had placed such confidence in their idol Quetzalcoatl that they believed no human power could defeat or harm them. They thought that they would be able to vanquish us in a very short time. First, because the Spaniards were so few, and second, because the Tlaxcalans had brought them against Cholula by deceit. Their faith in their idol was so complete that they believed it would ravage their enemies with the fire and thunder of heaven and drown them in a vast flood of water. This is what they believed, and they proclaimed it in loud voices, "Let the strangers come. We will see if they are so powerful. Our god Quetzalcoatl is here with us, and they can never defeat him. Let them come, the weaklings. We are waiting to see them, and we laugh at their stupid delusions. They are fools or madmen if they trust in these sodomites from Tlaxcala, who are nothing but their women. And let the hirelings come too. They have sold themselves in their terror. Look at the scum of Tlaxcala, the cowards of Tlaxcala, the guilty ones. They were conquered by the city of Mexico, and now they bring strangers to defend them. How could you change so much? How could you put yourselves in the hands of these foreign savages? Oh, you frightened beggars, you have lost the immortal glory that was won by your heroes, who sprang from the pure blood of ancient Teochichimicas, the founders of your nation. What will become of you, you traitors? We are waiting, and you will see how our god Quetzalcoatl punishes his foes." They shouted these things and other similar insults because they believed that their enemy would surely be consumed by bolts of fire which would fall from heaven, and that great rivers of water would pour from the temples of their idols to drown both the Tlaxcalans and the Spanish soldiers. This caused the Tlaxcalans to no little fear and concern, for they believed that all would happen as the Cholulans predicted, and that priests of the temple of Quetzalcoatl proclaimed it at the top of their voices. But when the Tlaxcalans heard the Spaniards call out to St. James, and saw them burn the temples and hurl the idols to the ground, profaning them with great zeal and determination, and when they also saw that the idols were powerless, that no flames fell and no rivers poured out, then they understood the description and knew it was all falsehoods and lies. Thus encouraged, they grew so brave that the slaughter and havoc increased beyond imagining. Our friends also became well aware of the Spaniards' courage. They never again plotted any crimes, but were guided by the divine order, which was to serve our Lord by conquering this land and rescuing it from the power of the devil. Before the battle began, the city of Tlaxcala sent messengers and ambassadors to Cholula to ask for peace and to say that they were marching not against the Cholulans, but against the Culihuas or Culihuacanenses Mexicanos. They were called Culihuas, it is said, because they had come from the region of Culiacan in the west, and Mexicanos because the city which they founded and made supreme was called Mexico. The envoys told the Cholulans that they were marching under the command of Cortez, that they came desiring peace. They said that the people of Cholula should fear no harm from the bearded strangers, for these were a very great and noble people who only sought their friendship. Thus they begged the Cholulans as friends to receive the strangers in peace, because they would be well used by them and suffer no ill treatment. But they also warned them not to anger the white men, for they were a very warlike, daring, and valiant people who carried superior weapons made of white metal. They said this because there was no iron among the natives, only copper. They also said that the strangers brought arms which could shoot fire and wild animals on leashes, that they were dressed and shod in iron, and had powerful crossbows and lions and ounces so ferocious that they ate people, meaning the fierce greyhounds and mastiffs which the Spaniards had brought with them, and that against this might the Cholulans could not prevail or even defend themselves if they angered the gods and did not surrender peacefully, as they should, to avoid greater harm. And they counseled them as friends to act in this manner. But the Cholulans paid no attention to these words, preferring to die rather than surrender. Rejecting the good counsel of Tlaxcalans, they flayed the face of Patla Huutzin, the ambassador, a man of great repute and valor. They did the same to his arms, which they flayed to the elbows, and they cut his hands at the wrists so that they dangled. In this cruel fashion, they sent him away, saying, "Go back and tell Tlaxcalans and those other beggars or gods, or whatever they are, this is how we invite them to come. This is the answer we send them." The ambassador returned in great agony, victim of an outrage that caused much horror and grief in the Republic, because he was one of the worthiest and most handsome men of this land. He died in the service of his homeland and Republic, where his fame is eternal among his people, who keep his memory alive in their song and sayings. The Tlaxcalans were enraged at this inhuman treatment of Patla Huitzin. They took such unthinkable cruelty as a great affront, since all ambassadors were traditionally respected and honored by foreign kings and lords, to whom they reported the treaties, wars, and other events that took place in these provinces and kingdoms. Therefore they said to Cortez, "Most valiant lord, we wish to accompany you in order to seek vengeance against Cholula for its insolent wickedness, and to conquer and destroy that city and its province. A people so obstinate and vicious, so evil and tyrannous, should not remain alive. And if there were no other cause than this, they would deserve eternal punishment. For they have not thanked us for our good counsel, but have scorned and despised us because of our love for you." The valiant Cortez answered them with a stern face, "Have no fear. I promise you revenge." And he kept this promise, waging a cruel war in which vast multitudes were slaughtered, as is recorded in the Chronicles. The Cholulans said that their foes would all be drowned by their idol Quetzalcoatl. This was the most venerated idol among the many that were worshipped in this land, and its temple of Cholula was considered a shrine to the gods. They said that when the crust was scraped from a portion of the lime surface of the temple, water gushed out. To save themselves from drowning, they sacrificed children of 2 or 3 years of age and mixed their blood with lime to make a kind of cement with which to stop up the springs and founts. They said that if they were ever in danger during a war with the white gods and the Tlaxcalans, they would break open all the mortared surfaces, from which a flood of water would pour forth to drown their enemies. And when they saw how hard pressed they were, they set to work. The destruction of Cholula. But none of their expectations was fulfilled, and they lost all hope. Of those who died in the Battle of Cholula, the greater number hurled themselves from the temple pyramid in their despair. And they also hurled the idol of Quetzalcoatl head first from the pyramid, for this form of suicide had always been a custom among them. They were as rebellious and contemptuous as any stiff-necked, ungovernable people, and it was their custom to die in a manner contrary to that of other nations, that is, to die headlong. In the end, the greater part of them died in despair by killing themselves. When the Battle of Cholula was finished, the Cholulans understood and believed that the God of the white men, who were his most powerful sons, was more potent than theirs. Our friends, the Tlaxcalans, seeing themselves in the very thick of the battle and massacre, called upon St. James, Santiago, the apostle, shouting his name in loud voices, Santiago! And from that day to this day, when they are in some difficulty or danger, the Tlaxcalans invoke the saint Santiago. They made use of very good counsel given them by Cortez, so that they could be distinguished and would not die among the enemy by mistake. Since their weapons and emblems and those of the enemy were almost the same, with only the slightest differences, and since there was such a great multitude of people on both sides, some means of identification was a necessity. Otherwise, in the press of battle, they would have killed their own warriors without knowing it. Therefore, they wore plaited garlands of feather grass on their heads, in order to recognize each other, and the counsel proved to be of considerable value. When Cholula had been stormed and destroyed, and a great host of people killed and plundered, our armies marched forward again, causing terror wherever they went, until the news of the destruction spread through the whole land. The people were astonished to hear such strange reports, and to learn how the Cholulans were defeated and slain in so short a time, and how their idol Quetzalcoatl had not served them in any way. The Spaniards take possession of the city. When the Spaniards entered the royal house, they placed Montezuma under guard and kept him under their vigilance. They also placed a guard over Itzcoatl, but the other lords were permitted to depart. Then the Spaniards fired one of their cannons, and this caused great confusion in the city. The people scattered in every direction. They fled without rhyme or reason. They ran off as if they were being pursued. It was as if they had eaten the mushrooms that confuse the mind, or had seen some dreadful apparition. They were all overcome by terror, as if their hearts had fainted. And when night fell, the panic spread throughout the city, and their fears would not let them sleep. In the morning, the Spaniards told Montezuma what they needed in the way of supplies: tortillas, fried chickens, hen's eggs, pure water, firewood, and charcoal. Also, large clean cooking pots, water jars, pitchers, dishes, and other pottery. Montezuma ordered that all be sent to them. The chiefs who received this order were angry with their king Montezuma, and no longer revered or respected him. But they furnished the Spaniards with all the provisions they needed: food, beverages, and water, and fodder for their horses. The Spanish revealed their greed. When the Spaniards were installed in the palace, they asked Montezuma about the city's resources and reserves, and about the warriors' ensigns and shields. They questioned him closely and then demanded gold. Montezuma guided them to it. They surrounded him and crowded close with their weapons. He walked in the center while they formed a circle around him. When they arrived at the treasure house called Tuicalco, the riches of gold and feathers were brought out to them. Ornaments made of quetzal feathers, richly worked shields, discs of gold, the necklaces of the idols, gold nose plugs, gold greaves, and bracelets and crowns. The Spaniards immediately stripped the feathers from the gold shields and ensigns. They gathered all the gold into a great mound and set fire to everything else, regardless of its value. Then they melted down the gold into ingots. As for the precious green stones, they took only the best of them. The rest were snatched up by the Tlaxcalans. The Spaniards searched through the whole treasure house, questioning and quarreling, and seized every object they thought was beautiful. The seizure of Montezuma's treasures. Next they went to Montezuma's storehouse in the place called Tococalco, place of the Palace of the Birds, where his personal treasures were kept. The Spaniards grinned like little beasts and patted each other with delight. When they entered the Hall of Treasures, it was as if they had arrived in paradise. They searched everywhere and coveted everything. They were slaves to their own greed. All of Montezuma's possessions were brought out. Fine bracelets, necklaces with large stones, ankle rings with little gold bells, the royal crowns and all the royal finery, everything that belonged to the king and was reserved to him only. They seized these treasures as if they were their own, as if this plunder were merely a stroke of good luck. And when they had taken all the gold, they heaped up everything else in the middle of the patio. La Malinche called the nobles together. She climbed to the palace roof and cried, "Mexicanos, come forward! The Spaniards need your help. Bring them food and pure water. They are tired and hungry. They are almost fainting from exhaustion. Why do you not come forward? Are you angry with them?" The Mexicans were too frightened to approach. They were crushed by terror and would not risk coming forward. They shied away as if the Spaniards were wild beasts, as if the hour were midnight on the blackest night of the year. They brought them whatever they needed, but shook in fear as they did so. They delivered the supplies to the Spaniards. With trembling hands, they turned and hurried away. The massacre in the main temple during the fiesta of Toxcatl. The preparations for the fiesta. The Aztecs begged permission of their king to hold the fiesta of Huitzilopochtli. The Spaniards wanted to see this fiesta to learn how it was celebrated. A delegation of the celebrants came to the palace where Montezuma was a prisoner, and when their spokesman asked his permission, he granted it to them. As soon as the delegation returned, the women began to grind seeds of the chicolote. These women had fasted for a whole year. They ground the seeds in the patio of the temple. The Spaniards came out of the palace together, dressed in armor and carrying their weapons with them. They stalked among the women and looked at them one by one. They stared into the faces of the women who were grinding seeds. After this cold inspection, they went back into the palace. It is said that they planned to kill the celebrants if the men entered the patio. The statue of Huitzilopochtli. On the evening before the fiesta of Toxcatl, the celebrants began to model a statue of Huitzilopochtli. They gave it such a human appearance that it seemed the body of a living man. Yet they made the statue with nothing but a paste made of the ground seeds of the chicolote, which they shaped over an armature of sticks. When the statue was finished, they dressed it in a rich feathers, and they painted crossbars over and under its eyes. They also clipped on its earrings of turquoise mosaic. These were in the shape of serpents, with gold rings hanging from them. Its nose plug, in the shape of an arrow, was made of gold and was inlaid with fine stones. They placed the magic headdress of hummingbird feathers on its head. They also adorned it with anequilotl, which was a belt made of feathers, with a cone at the back. Then they hung around its neck an ornament of yellow parrot feathers, fringed like the locks of a young boy. Over this they made its nettle leaf cape, which was painted black and decorated with 5 clusters of eagle feathers. Next they wrapped in it its cloak, which was painted with skulls and bones, and over this they fastened its vest. The vest was painted with dismembered human parts, skulls, ears, hearts, intestines, torsos, breasts, hands, and feet. They also put on its mashalatl, or loincloth, which was decorated with images of dissevered limbs and fringed with amate paper. This mashatlotl was painted with vertical stripes of bright blue. They fastened a red paper flag at its shoulder and placed on its head what looked like a sacrificial flint knife. This too was made of red paper. It seemed to have been steeped in blood. The statue carried a tehuili, a bamboo shield decorated with 4 clusters of fine eagle feathers. The pendant of this shield was blood red, like the knife and the shoulder flag. The statue also carried 4 arrows. Finally, they put the wristbands on its arms. The bands, made of coyote skin, were fringed with paper cut into little strips. The beginning of the fiesta. Early the next morning, the statue's face was uncovered by those who had been chosen for that ceremony. They gathered in front of the idol in single file and offered its gifts of food, such as round seed cakes and perhaps human flesh. But they did not carry it up to its temple on top of the pyramid. All the young warriors were eager for the fiesta to begin. They had sworn to dance and sing with all their hearts, so that the Spaniards would marvel at the beauty of the rituals. The procession began, and the celebrants filed into the temple to dance the dance of the serpent. When they were all together in the patio, the songs and the dance began. Those who had fasted for 20 days and those who had fasted for a year were in command of the others. They kept the dancers in file with their pine wands. If anyone wished to urinate, he did not stop dancing, but simply opened his clothing at the hips and separated his clusters of heron feathers. If anyone disobeyed the leaders or was not in his proper place, they struck him on the hips and shoulders. Then they drove him out of the patio, beating him and shoving him from the behind. They pushed him so hard that he sprawled to the ground, and they dragged him outside by the ears. No one dare say a word about this punishment, for those who had fasted during the year were feared and venerated. They had earned the exclusive title, Brothers of Huitzilopochtli. The great captains, the bravest warriors, danced at the head of the files to guide the others. The youths followed at a slight distance. Some of the youths wore their hair gathered into large locks, a sign that they had never taken any captives. Others carried their headdresses on their shoulders. They had taken captives, but only with help. Then came the recruits, who were called the young warriors. They had each captured an enemy or two. The others called to them, "Come, comrades! Show us how brave you are! Dance with all your hearts!" The Spaniards attacked the celebrants. At this moment in the fiesta, when the dance was loveliest and when the song was linked to song, the Spaniards were seized with an urge to kill the celebrants. They all ran forward, armed as if for battle. They closed the entrances and passageways, all the gates of the patio, the Eagle Gate in the Lesser Palace, the Gate of the Canestalk, and the Gate of the Serpent of Mirrors. They posted guards so that no one could escape, and then rushed into the sacred patio to slaughter the celebrants. They came on foot, carrying their swords and their wooden or metal shields. They ran in among the dancers, forcing their way to the place where the drums were played. They attacked the man who was drumming and cut off his arms. Then they cut off his head, and it rolled across the floor. They attacked all the celebrants, stabbing them, spearing them, striking them with their swords. They attacked some of them from behind, and these instantly fell to the ground with their entrails hanging out. Others they beheaded. They cut off their heads, or split their heads to pieces. They struck others in the shoulders, and their arms were torn from their bodies. They wounded some in the thigh and some in the calf. They slashed others in the abdomen, and their entrails all spilled to the ground. Some attempted to run away, but their intestines dragged as they ran. They seemed to tangle their feet in their own entrails. No matter how they tried to save themselves, they could find no escape. Some attempted to force their way out, but the Spaniards murdered them at the gates. Others climbed the walls, but they could not save themselves. Those who ran into the communal houses were safe there for a while. So were those who lay down among the victims and pretended to be dead. But if they stood up again, the Spaniards saw them and killed them. The blood of the warriors flowed like water and gathered into pools. The pools widened, and the stench of blood and entrails filled the air. The Spaniards ran into the communal houses to kill those who were hiding. They ran everywhere and searched everywhere. They invaded every room, hunting and killing. The Aztecs retaliate. When the news of this massacre was heard outside the sacred patio, a great cry went up. "Mexicanos, come running! Bring your spears and shields. The strangers have murdered our warriors." This cry was answered with a roar of grief and anger. The people shouted and wailed and beat their palms against their mouths. The captains assembled at once, as if the hour had been determined in advance. They all carried their spears and shields. Then the battle began. The Aztecs attacked with javelins and arrows, even with the light spears that are used for hunting birds. They hurled their javelins with all their strength, and the cloud of missiles spread out over the Spaniards like a yellow cloak. The Spaniards immediately took refuge in the palace. They began to shoot at the Mexicans with their iron arrows and to fire their cannons and arquebuses, and they shackled Montezuma in chains. The lament for the dead. The Mexicans who had died in the massacre were taken out of the patio one by one, and inquiries were made to discover their names. The fathers and mothers of the dead wept and lamented. Each victim was taken first to his own home and then to the sacred patio, where all the dead were brought together. Some of the bodies were later burned in the place called the Eagle Urn, and others in the house of the young men. Montezuma's message. At sunset, each Quatzin climbed onto the roof of the palace and shouted this proclamation: "Mexicanos, Tlatalocos, Your king, the Lord Montezuma, has sent me to speak for him. Mexicanos, hear me, for these are the words to you. We must not fight them. We are not their equals in battle. Put down your shields and arrows. He tells you this because it is the aged who will suffer most, and they deserve your pity. The humblest classes will also suffer, and so will the innocent children who still crawl on all fours, who still sleep in their cradles. Therefore, Montezuma says, we are not strong enough to defeat them. Stop fighting and return to your homes. Mexicanos, they have put your king in chains. His feet are bound with chains. When each Quatzin had finished speaking, there was a great uproar among the people. They shouted insults at him in their fury and cried, who is Montezuma to give us orders? We are no longer his slaves. They shouted war cries and fired arrows at the rooftop. The Spaniards quickly hid Montezuma and Itzaquatzin behind their shields so that the arrows would not find them. The Mexicans were enraged because the attack on the captains had been so treacherous. Their warriors had been killed without the slightest warning. Now they refused to go away or to put down their arms. The Spaniards are besieged. The royal palace was placed under siege. The Mexicans kept a close watch to prevent anyone from stealing in with food for the Spaniards. They also stopped delivering supplies. They brought them absolutely nothing and waited for them to die of hunger. A few people attempted to communicate with the Spaniards. They hoped to win their favor by giving them advice and information or by secretly bringing them food. But the guards found them and killed them on the spot. They broke their necks or stoned them to death. Once a group of porters was discovered bringing rabbit skins into the city. They let slip the fact that other persons had been hiding in their midst. Therefore, strict orders were issued to maintain a watch over all the roads and causeways leading to the city. The porters themselves had been sent by the chiefs, Ayatzontepec and Chinantanlan. They were only performing their duties, but the guards seized them and put them to death for no reason. They would shout, "Here's another one!" and they killed them. And if they happened to see one of the Montezuma's servants with his glass lip plug, they slaughtered him at once, claiming he was bringing food to Montezuma. They seized anyone who was dressed like a porter or any other servant. "Here's another traitor," they would say. "He's bringing news to Montezuma." The prisoner would try to save his life by pleading with him. What are you doing, Mexicanos? I'm not a traitor." But they would answer, yes, you are. We know you're one of his servants." And they would immediately put him to death. They stopped and examined everyone in the same way, studying each man's face and questioning him about his work. No one could walk out of doors without being arrested and accused. They sentenced a great many people for imaginary crimes. The victims were executed for acts they had never committed. The other servants, therefore, went home and hid themselves. They were afraid to be seen in public. They knew what would happen to them if they fell into the hands of the guards or of the other warriors. After they had trapped the Spaniards in the palace, the Mexicans kept them under attack for 7 days. And for 23 days, they foiled all their attempts to break out. During this time, all the causeways were closed off. The Mexicans tore up the bridges, opened great gaps in the pavement, and built a whole series of barricades. They did everything they could to make the causeways impassable. They also closed off the roads by building walls and roadblocks. They obstructed all the roads and streets of the city. The massacre, according to the Codex Albin. Montezuma said to La Malinche, Please ask the god to hear me. It is almost time to celebrate the fiesta of Tishkotl. It will only last for 10 days, and we beg his permission to hold it. We merely burn some incense and dance our dances. There will be a little noise because of the music, but that is all. The captain said, Very well. Tell him he may hold it. Then he left the city to meet another force of Spaniards who were marching in this direction. Pedro de Alvarado, called the Sun, was in command during his absence. When the day of the fiesta arrived, Montezuma said to the Sun, Please hear me, O Lord. We beg your permission to begin the fiesta to our God. The Sun replied, Let it begin. We shall be here to watch it. The Aztec captains then called for their elder brothers who were given this order. You must celebrate the fiesta as grandly as possible. The elder brothers replied, We will dance with all our might. Then Tecansin, the chief of the armory, said, Please remind the Lord that he is here, not in Cholula. You know how they trap the Cholulans in their patio. They have already caused us enough trouble. We should hide our weapons close at hand. But Montezuma said, Are we at war with them? I tell you, we can trust them. We can trust the Spaniards. Tecansin said, Very well. Then the songs and the dances began. A young captain wearing a lip plug guided the dancers. He was Cuatlatzol from Tolnahuac. But the songs had hardly begun when the Christians came out of the palace. They entered the patio and stationed 4 guards at each entrance. Then they attacked the captain who was guiding the dance. One of the Spaniards struck the idol in the face, and others attacked the 3 men who were playing the drums. After that, there was a general slaughter until the patio was heaped with corpses. A priest from the place of the cane fields cried out in a loud voice, Mexicanos! Who said we are not at war? Who said we can trust them? The Mexicans could only fight back with sticks of wood. They were cut to pieces by the swords. Finally, the Spaniards retired to the palace where they were lodged. The Night of Sorrows. The Spaniards abandoned the city. At midnight, the Spaniards and Tlaxcalans came out into the enclosed ranks, the Spaniards going first and the Tlaxcalans following. The Allies kept very close behind, as if they were crowding up against a wall. The sky was overcast, and rain fell all night in the darkness. But it was a gentle rain, more like a drizzle or heavy dew. The Spaniards carried portable wooden bridges to cross the canals. They set them in place, crossed over, and raised them again. They were able to pass the first 3 canals, the Tecpancinco, the Tlaxpotlan, and the Atenchicalco, without being seen. But when they reached the 4th, the Mixcoatzicatlin, their retreat was discovered. The battle begins. The first alarm was raised by a woman who was drawing water at the edge of the canal. She cried, Mexicanos, come running! They are crossing the canal! Our enemies are escaping! Then a priest of Huitzilopochtli shouted the call to arms from the temple pyramid. His voice rang out over the city. Captains, warriors, Mexicanos! Our enemies are escaping! Follow them in your boats! Cut them off and destroy them! When they heard this cry, the warriors leaped into the boats and set out in pursuit. These boats were from the garrisons of Tenochtitlan and Tlatelolco, and were protected by the warriors' shields. The boatmen paddled with all their might. They lashed the water of the lake until it boiled. Other warriors set out on foot, racing to Nonohuelco and then to Tlacopan to cut off their retreat. The boats converged on the Spaniards from both sides of the causeway, and the warriors loosed a storm of arrows at the fleeing army. But the Spaniards also turned to shoot at the Aztecs. They fired their crossbows and their arquebuses. The Spaniards and Tlaxcalans suffered many casualties, but many of the Aztec warriors also were killed or wounded. The massacre at the Canal of the Toltecs. When the Spaniards reached the Canal of the Toltecs in Tlatecahuacan, they hurled themselves headlong into the water, as if they were leaping from a cliff. The Tlaxcalans, the allies from Tlituicuitepec, the Spanish foot soldiers and horsemen, the few women who accompanied the army, all came to the brink and plunged over it. The canal was soon choked with the bodies of men and horses. They filled the gap in the causeway with their own drowned bodies. Those who followed crossed to the other side by walking on the corpses. When they reached Petlatco, where there was another canal, they crossed over on their portable bridge without being attacked by the Aztecs. They stopped and rested there for a short while and began to feel more like men again. Then they marched on to Popocla. Dawn was breaking as they entered the village. Their hearts were cheered by the brightening light of this new day. They thought the horrors of their retreat by night were all behind them. But suddenly they heard the cries, and the Aztecs swarmed through the streets and surrounded them. They had come to capture Tlaxcalans for their sacrifices. They also wanted to complete their revenge against the Spaniards. The Aztecs harried the army all the way to Tlacopan. Chimalpopoca, the son of Montezuma, was killed in the action at Tlihuican by the arrow from the crossbows. Tlatecatzin, the Tepanec prince, was wounded in the same action and died shortly after. He had served the Spaniards as a guide and advisor, pointing out the best roads and shortcuts. The Spaniards take refuge at Teotihuacan. Then the Spaniards forded a small river called the Tepazolatl. Next they crossed two rivers, the Tepzolac and the Jacuico, and stopped at Otoncalpulco, where the temple patio was surrounded by a wooden wall. They rested there in safety, catching their breath and recovering their strength. While they were resting, the Lord of Teotihuacan paid them a visit. He was known as the Atomi, a title reserved for the nobility. He greeted them and offered them the gifts of food his servants had brought: tortillas, eggs, roast chickens, a few live hens, and various kinds of fruit. He placed these offerings in front of the captain and said, "My lords, you are weary. You have suffered many heartaches. We beg the gods to rest now and enjoy these gifts." La Malinche said, "My lord, the captain wishes to know where you are from." He answered, "Tell our lord we are from Teotihuacan. Tell him that we hope he will visit us." La Malinche said, "The captain thanks you. We shall arrive tomorrow or the day after." The Aztecs recover the spoils. As soon as it was daylight, the Aztecs cleared the dead Spaniards and Tlaxcalans out of the canals and stripped them of everything they wore. They loaded the bodies of the Tlaxcalans into canoes and took them out to where the rushes grow. They threw them among the rushes without burying them, without giving them another glance. They also threw out the corpses of the women who had been killed in the retreat. The naked bodies of these women were the color of ripe corn, for they had painted themselves with yellow paint. But they laid out the corpses of the Spanish apart from the others. They lined them up in rows in a separate place. Their bodies were as white as the new buds of the cane stalk, as white as the buds of the maguey. They also removed the dead stags. They had carried the gods on their shoulders. Then they carried up everything the Spaniards had abandoned in their terror. When a man saw something he wanted, he took it. and it became his property. He hefted it onto his shoulders and carried it home. They also collected all the weapons that had been left behind or had fallen into the canal: the cannons, the arquebuses, the swords, spears, bows, and arrows, along with all the steel helmets, coats of mail, and breastplates, and the shields of metal, wood, and hide. They recovered the gold ingots, the gold discs, the tubes of gold dust, and the chakhuitl collars and with their gold pendants. They gathered up everything they could find and searched the waters of the canal with the greatest care. Some of them groped with their hands, and others felt about with their feet. Those who went head first were able to keep their balance, but those who came along behind them all fell into the water. The account by Elva Ish Leoshoshitl. Cortez turned in the direction of Tenochtitlan and entered the city of Texcoco. He was received only by a group of knights, because the legitimate sons of King Netzahuilpili had been hidden by their servants, and the other lords were being held by the Aztecs as hostages. He entered Tenochtitlan with his army of Spaniards and allies on the day of St. John the Baptist, without being molested in any way. The Mexicans gave them everything they needed, but when they saw that Cortez had no intention of leaving the city or of freeing their leaders, they rallied their warriors and attacked the Spaniards. This attack began on the day after Cortez entered the city and lasted for 7 days. On the third day, Montezuma climbed onto the rooftop and tried to admonish his people, but they cursed him and shouted that he was a coward and traitor to his country. They even threatened with him with their weapons. It is said that an Indian killed him with a stone from his sling, but the palace servants declared that the Spaniards put him to death by stabbing him in the abdomen with their swords. On the 7th day, the Spaniards abandoned the city along with the Tlaxcalans, the Huixotincintas, and their allies. They fled down the causeway that leads out to Tlacopan, but before they left, they murdered King Cacama of Texcoco and his 3 sisters and 2 of his brothers. There are several accounts by Indians who took part in the fighting that ensued. They tell how their warriors killed a great many of the Spaniards and their allies, and how the army took refuge on a mountain near Tlacopan, and they marched to Tlaxcala. The siege of Tenochtitlan. Now the Spaniards began to wage war against us. They attacked us by land for 10 days, and their ships appeared. 20 days later, they gathered all their ships together near Nonohuerco, off the place called Matzatzin Tomalco. The allies from Tlaxcala and Huixocinco set up their camp on either side of the road. Our warriors from Tlatelolco immediately leapt into the canoes and set out for Matzatzin Tomalco and the Nonohuerco road. But no one set out from Tenochtitlan to assist us. Only the Tlatelolcos were ready when the Spaniards arrived in their ships. On the following day, the ships sailed to Xoloco. The fighting at Xoloco and Huitzilan lasted for 2 days. When the battle was underway, the warriors from Tenochtitlan began to mutiny. They said, "Where are our chiefs? They have fired scarcely a single arrow. Do they think they have fought like men?" Then they seized 4 of their own leaders and put them to death. The victims were 2 captains, Huinochtli and Cuapan, and the priest of Amantlan and Tlalocan. This was the second time that the people of Tenochtitlan killed their own leaders. The flight to Tlatelolco. The Spaniards set up 2 cannons in the middle of the road and aimed them at the city. When they fired them, one of the shots struck the Eagle Gate. The people of the city were so terrified that they began to flee to Tlatelolco. They brought their idol Huitzilopochtli with them, setting him up in the house of the young men. Their king, Cuauhtemoc, also abandoned Tenochtitlan. Their chief said, Mexicanos, Tlatelolcos, all is not lost. We can still defend our houses. We can prevent them from capturing our storehouses and the produce of our lands. We can save the sustenance of life, our stores of corn. We can also save our weapons and insignia, our clusters of rich feathers, our gold feathers and precious stones. Do not be discouraged, Mexicanos. Do not lose heart. We are Mexicanos. We are Tlatelolcas. During the whole time we were fighting, the warriors of Tenochtitlan were nowhere to be seen. The battles of Yacolotco, Atzecapan, Coatlan, Nonahualco, Xochohuitzlan, Tepeyacacac, and elsewhere were all fought by ourselves, by Tlatelolcas. In the same way, the canals were defended slowly by Tlatelolcas. The captains from Tenochtitlan cut their hair short, and so did those of lesser rank. The Atomis and other ranks that usually wore headdresses did not wear them during all the time we were fighting. The Tlatelolcas surrounded the most important captains, and their women taunted them. Why are you hanging back? You have no shame? No woman would ever paint her face for you again. The wives of the men from Tenochtitlan wept and begged for pity. When the warriors of Tlatelolco heard what was happening, they began to shout. But still the brave captains of Tenochtitlan hung back. As for the Tlatelolcas, their humblest warriors died fighting as bravely as their captains. The Tlatelolcas are invited to make a treaty. A Spaniard named Castaneda approached us in Huaytenango. He was accompanied by a group of Tlaxcalans who shouted at the guards on the watchtower near the breakwater. These guards were Itzapalanque, the captain of Chapultepec, two captains from Tlapala, and Quixagaltzin. Castaneda shouted to them, "Come here!" "What do you want?" they asked him. "We will come closer." They got into a boat and approached to within speaking distance of him. "Now what have you got to say to us?" the Tlaxcalans asked. "Where are you from?" And when they learned that the guards were from Tlatelolco, they said, "Good, you're the men we are looking for. Come with us. The God has sent for you." The guards went with Castaneda to Nonohuerco. The captain was in the house of the mist there, along with La Malinche, the son, who was Alvarado, and Sandoval. A number of the native lords were also present, and they told the captain, "The Tlatelolcos have arrived. We sent for them to come here." La Malinche said to the guards, "Come forward. The captain wants to know, what can the chiefs of Tenochtitlan be thinking of? Is Cuauhtemoc a stupid, willful little boy? Has he no mercy on the women and children of his city? Must even the old men perish? See, the kings of Tlaxcala, Huixatzinco, Cholula, Chalco, Acalhuican, Cuanahuac, Xochimilco, Mixquiec, Cuitlahuac, and Culacan are all here with me." One of the kings said, "Do the people of Tenochtitlan think they are playing a game? Already their hearts are grieving for the city in which they are born. If they will not surrender, we should abandon them and let them perish by themselves. Why should the Tlatelolcas feel sorry when the people of Tenochtitlan bring a senseless destruction on themselves?" The guards from Tlatelolco said, "Our lords, it may be as you say." The god said, "Tell Cuauhtemoc that the other kings have all abandoned him. I will go to Teocahuiyacan, where his forces are gathered. I will send ships to Coyoacan." The guards returned to speak with the followers of Cuauhtemoc. They shouted the message to them from their boats, but the Tlatelolcas would not abandon the people of Tenochtitlan. The fighting is renewed. The Spaniards made ready to attack us, and the war broke out again. They assembled their forces in Quepopan and Coscahuaco. A vast number of our warriors were killed by their metal darts. Their ships sailed to Texopan, and the battle there lasted 3 days. When they had forced us to retreat, they entered the sacred patio, where there was a 4-day battle. Then they reached Yacacolco. The Tlatelolcas set up 3 racks of heads in 3 different places. The first rack was in the sacred patio of Tlatelolco, the Black House, where we strung up the heads of our lords, the Spaniards. The second was in Acacolco, where we strung up Spanish heads and the heads of 2 of their horses. The third was in Zacatla, in front of the temple of the earth goddess Quihuacotl, where we strung up the heads of the Tlaxcalans. The women of Tlatelolcos joined in the fighting. They struck at the enemy and shot arrows at them. They tucked up their skirts and dresses in the regalia of war. The Spaniards forced us to retreat. Then they occupied the marketplace. The Tlatelolcos, the Jaguar Knights, the Eagle Knights, the great warriors were defeated, and this was the end of the battle. It lasted 5 days, and 2,000 Tlatelolcas were killed in action. During the battle, the Spaniards were killed. The Spaniards set up a canopy for the captain in the marketplace. They also mounted a catapult on the temple platform. Epic description of the besieged city. And all these misfortunes befell us. When we saw them and wondered at them, we suffered this unhappy fate. Broken spears lie in the roads. We have torn our hair in our grief. The houses are roofless now, and their walls are red with blood. Worms are swarming in the streets and plazas, and the walls are splattered with gore. The water has turned red as if it were dyed, and when we drink it, it has a taste of brine. We have pounded our hands in despair against the adobe walls, for our inheritance, our city, is lost and dead. The shields of our warriors were its defense, but they could not save it. We have chewed dried twigs and salt grasses. We have filled our mouths with dust and bits of adobe. We have eaten lizards, rats, and worms. When we had meat, we ate it almost raw. It was scarcely on the fire before we snatched it and gobbled it down. They set a price on all of us, on the young men, the priests, the boys and girls. The price of a poor man was only 2 handfuls of corn, or 10 cakes made from mosses, or 20 cakes of salty couch grass. Gold, jade, rich cloths, quetzal feathers, everything that once was precious was now considered worthless. The captains delivered several prisoners of war to Cuauhtemoc to be sacrificed. He performed the sacrifices in person, cutting them open with a stone knife. The message from Cortez. Soon after this, the Spaniards brought Xochitl the Acohuancatl, whose house was in Tenochtitlan, to the marketplace in Tlatelolco. They gripped him by both arms as they brought him there. They kept him with them for 20 days and then let him go. They also brought in a cannon, which they set up in the place where incense was sold. The Tlatelolcas ran forward to surround Xochitl. They were led by the captain from Huitzan Huac, who was a Huasteco. Xochitl was placed under guard in the temple of the woman in Oxocotzinco. As soon as the Spaniards had set Xochitl loose in the marketplace, they stopped attacking us. There was no more fighting, and no prisoners were taken. 3 of the great chiefs said to Cuauhtemoc, "Our prince, the Spaniards have sent us one of their magistrates, Xochitl, the Acohuacatl. It is said that he has a message for you." Cuauhtemoc asked them, "What is your advice?" The chiefs all began to shout at once, "Let the message be brought here. We have made auguries with paper and with incense. The captain who sees Xochitl should bring us the message." The captain was sent to question Xochitl in the temple of the woman. Xochitl said, "The god and La Malinche send word to Cuauhtemoc and the other princes that there is no hope for them. Have they no pity on the little children, the old men, the old women? What more can they do? Everything is settled. You are to deliver women with light skins, corn, chicken, eggs, and tortillas. This is your last chance. The people of Tenochtitlan must choose whether to surrender or be destroyed." The captain reported this message to Cuauhtemoc and the lords of Tlatelolco. The lords deliberated among themselves. "What do you think about this? What are we to do?" The city falls. Cuauhtemoc said to the fortune tellers, "Please come forward. What do you see in your books?" One of the priests replied, "My prince, hear the truth that we tell you. In only 4 days we shall have completed the period of 80 days. It will be the will of Huitzilopochtli that nothing further shall happen to us. Let us wait until these 4 days have passed." But then the fighting broke out again. The captain of Huitznahuac, the same Huasteco who had brought in Xochitl, renewed the struggle. The enemy forced us to retreat to Amachac. When they also attacked us there, the general flight began. The lake was full of people, and the roads leading to the mainland were all crowded. Thus the people of Tenochtitlan and Tlatelolco gave up the struggle and abandoned the city. We all gathered in Amachac. We had no shields and no macanas. We had nothing to eat and no shelter, and it rained all night. The people flee the city. Cuauhtemoc was taken to Cortez along with 3 other princes. The captain was accompanied by Pedro de Alvarado and La Malinche. When the princes were made captives, the people began to leave, searching for a new place to stay. Everyone was in tatters, and the women's thighs were almost naked. The Christians searched all the refugees. They even opened the women's skirts and blouses and felt everywhere, their ears, their breasts, their hair. Our people scattered in all directions. They went to neighboring villages and huddled in corners in the houses of strangers. The city was conquered in the year 3 House. The date on which we departed was the day 1 Serpent in the 9th month. The lords of Tlatelolco went to Cuautitlan, even the greatest captains and warriors left in tatters. The women had only old rags to cover their heads, and they had patched together their blouses out of many colored scraps. The chiefs were grief-stricken and mourned to one another. "We have been defeated a second time." The offering of gold. A poor man was treacherously killed in Otzantlan as he was seeking refuge. The other refugees were shaken by his death and began to discuss what they could do. They said, "Let us beg mercy of our lord the captain." First, the leaders in Tlatelolco demanded gold objects from everyone. They collected many lip rings, lip plugs, nose plugs, and other ornaments. They searched anyone who might be hiding objects of gold behind his shield or under his clothing. When they had gathered everything they could find, they sent the treasure to Coyoacan in the custody of several chiefs. The chiefs said to the captain, "Our lord and master, please hear us. Your vassals, the great lords of Tlatelolco, beg you to have mercy. Your vassals and their people are being mistreated by the inhabitants of the villages where they have taken refuge. They scorn us and treacherously kill us. We have brought you these objects of gold, and we beg you to hear our pleas." Then they set the baskets of gold of objects before them. When the captain and La Malinche saw the gold, they grew very angry and said, "Is this what you have been wasting your time on? You could have been looking for the treasure that fell into the canal of the Toltecs. Where is it? We must have it." The chief said, "Cuauhtemoc gave it to Quiqualtocotl and the Huitzna Huacatil. They know where it is. Ask them." When the captain heard this, he ordered that the chiefs be placed in chains. La Malinche came to them later and said, "The captain says that you may leave and speak with your leaders. He is very grateful to you. It may be true that your people are being mistreated. Tell them to return. Tell your people to come back to their houses in Tlatelolco. The captain wants all the Tlatelolcas to reoccupy their quarter of the city. But tell your leaders that no one is to settle on Tenochtitlan itself, for it is the property of the gods. You may leave now." Cuauhtemoc is tortured. When the envoys from Tlatelolco had departed, the leaders of Tenochtitlan were brought before the captain, who wished to make them talk. This was when Cuauhtemoc's feet were burned. They brought him in at daybreak and tied him to a stake. They found the gold in Quila Huitonco, in the house of a chief named Itzo Botonqui. As soon as they seized it, they brought our princes, all of them bound to Coyoacan. About this time, the priest in charge of the temple of Huitzilopochtli was put to death. The Spaniards had tried to learn from him where the gods' finery and that of the high priest was kept. Later, they were informed that it was being guarded by certain chiefs in Coachichirco and Xatocan. They seized it and then hanged two of the chiefs in the middle of Matzalan Road. The return to Tlatelolco. The common people began to return to their houses in Tlatelolco. This was in the year 4 Rabbit. Then Timiloltzin and Don Juan Huihuitzin came back, and Goya Huihuitzin and Tepan Motzin both died in Cuautitlan. We were left entirely alone when we reoccupied Tlatelolco. Our masters, the Spaniards, did not seize any of our houses. They remained in Coyoacan and let us live in peace. They hanged Macui Xochitl, the king of Huitzilopochtli, in Coyoacan. They also hanged Piz Otzin, the king of Culiahuacan, and they fed the keeper of the Black House, along with several others, to their dogs. And 3 wise men of Huicatl from Texcoco were devoured by the Spanish dogs. They had come only to surrender. No one brought them or sent them there. They arrived bearing their painted sheets of paper. There were 4 of them, and only one escaped. The other 3 were overtaken there in Coyoacan. Elegies on the fall of the city. The fall of Tenochtitlan. Our cries of grief rise up, our tears rain down from Tlatelolco is lost. The Aztecs are fleeing across the lake. They are running away like women. How can we save our homes, my people? The Aztecs are deserting the city. The city is in flames, and all is darkness and destruction. Mota Cuitzin and Huitzilopochtli, Tlacotzin, the Tlatolalcol, Oconsin, the Tlacacuitli, are greeted with tears. Weep, my people. Know that with these disasters, we have lost the Mexican nation. The water has turned bitter. Our food is bitter. These are the acts of the giver of life. The Aztecs are besieged in the city. The Tlatelolcas are besieged in the city. The walls are black. The air is black with smoke. The guns flash in the darkness. They have captured Cuauhtemoc. They have captured the princes of Mexico. The Aztecs are besieged in the city. The Tlatelolcas are besieged in the city. After 9 days, they were taken to Coyoacan, Cuauhtemoc, Coanacoch, Tetlepanquetzlantzin. The kings are prisoners now. Tlacontzin consoled them. O my nephews, take heart. The kings are prisoners now. They are bound with chains. The king Cuauhtemoc replied, O my nephew, you are a prisoner. They have bound you in irons. But who is that at the side of Captain General? Ah, it is Doña Isabel, my little niece. Ah, it is true. The kings are prisoners now. You will be a slave and belong to another. The collar will be fashioned in Coyoacan, where the quetzal feathers will be woven. Who is this at the side of the Captain General? Ah, it is Doña Isabel, my little niece. Ah, it is true. The kings are prisoners now. Flowers and songs of sorrow. Nothing but flowers and songs of sorrow are left in Mexico and Tlatelolco, where once we saw warriors and wise men. We know it is true that we must perish, for we are mortal men. You, the giver of life, you have ordained it. We wander here and there in our desolate poverty. We are mortal men. We have seen bloodshed and pain where once we saw beauty and valor. We are crushed to the ground. We lie in ruins. There is nothing but grief and suffering in Mexico and Tlatelolco, where once we saw beauty and valor. Have you grown weary of your servants? Are you angry with your servants, O giver of life?